Hello, everyone, and welcome to Raising the Stakes. This is where we turn the interview around on Kara to answer questions that we get from the community. I'll be your guest interviewer, Jay Knight. Kara, how you doing today?
Doing good. How you doing, Jay?
I'm doing awesome. Um, you pulled me away from digging real deep into doing some website stuff, so I'm getting a nice little break and getting to do something I haven't done in a while, which is interview somebody.
There we go. Glad to do
Uh,
it.
s- awesome. Well, we get a lot of questions, and they come through Messenger, they come through email, people call us, and what we want to do today is dive a little bit into our processing and quality control, our sourcing and ranching practices, and then also just talk about like our perspective and the consumer's perspective and how those intersect. And so, um, let's start from necessarily kind of the ground up. A big question we have is, what factors are considered when we are selecting cattle for our program here at Colorado Craft Beef?
There's quite a few technical factors that we could get into the weeds, but I'll raise it to kind of the high level of where we start. We start with the type of cattle. So genetics, it's a genetic base. Everything that comes through CCB is an Angus base of some kind. We know historically Angus cattle have done well in our environment and they produce a high quality product. So that's where we start from a genetic base. We source from known ranches too. There's a lot to be said about knowing where your food comes from in general, but that's kind of part of the piece of the puzzle that we've helped to put together with CCB is tying that all the way from the ranch gate to the plate. And if we think about the way our beef production chain is, not every cow calf producer has a direct line to a consumer. So we're looking to partner with those cow calf producers that would like that. They'd like to know what their cattle do as far as how they perform, the kind of eating experience, etc. So we're looking for like-minded producers is where we're going to start, along with the genetic base. A lot of the different types of, not necessarily just performance, but the type of cattle that they are. So knowing that they're going to perform in our environment, and also that they're going to have a really good eating experience when they get on a consumer's plate.
And so, with working with these ranches, it really comes down to we're looking for the consistency in the quality of what the beef will be like. And in doing so, we have to look at almost the like there's no break. There's no like, well, let's send it over here and then we'll pick it up when it's done. It's like no, we are caring for these animals immediately, and ensuring that their life cycle kind of equals a product at the end that we're proud of.
It is definitely a fine balance in the beef industry because most producers, they have a finite set of resources. So they have their own natural resources that they're working with on their own operation, whether it's a ranch or a yearling operation or you go into a feeding setting. There's typically constraints, and you have to balance those natural resource constraints with the animal as well, which is also another natural resource, and the economics, which become kind of a fine balance, depend on which part of the beef chain, which I'm going to talk, the cattle chain, which translates into the beef chain. There's such a fine balance that you walk as a producer. So finding kind of where that marries to have the economic side of cattle production work for each producer on their operation, and the end product also have something that a consumer wants to come back and purchase again. That seems to be one of those nuances that can become difficult to balance, and that's where we're continually working every day to find that balance of where The cattle production side can also meet the consumer side of this equation, because we do have a very consumer first focused mindset, which is different than some producers in the particularly the cattle production chain. We think about the experience that a consumer is going to have when they sit down at their table and partake in our beef products all the way from the beginning. So we are very detail oriented on the type, so the breed, the genetics, the animal husbandry side of these animals, and then the quality control that goes into the processing side to make sure that a consumer has a great experience with every steak that comes from CCB.
And going beyond just endpoint to endpoint, how do our ranching practices uphold sustainability and animal welfare standards?
I put it in a frame of reference of that animal comes first. That's the way I was raised. My dad has been a caretaker of this land and these animals for years. And there's a reason that, the heritage part of this ranch, the land is still where it started and is still in this family, because we did take that caretaking at the highest regard. Because when we think about sustainability, it's kind of a buzzword, frankly, and there's a lot of factors that come into that. But our main focus here is the balance, like working with nature, essentially, not working against nature. So, for example, our ranch is most suited to have a summer grazing operation. So typically cattle graze from about that April time frame into September is pretty normal. That's common here. And that's what our land was really made to do. And so we focus on that. Like that's the most ideal use for our land here, which plays into the most efficient, efficiency is probably not the best term, but the most optimal use for the land and the animals. So when we look at the genetics of the animals that are going into CCB, we have some that tell us they should go to grass. They need that longer growing period for them as an individual, versus some that the genetics may tell us that they should go to finish and go into the beef chain before their little brother, or however you want to look at that. So we do really take that kind of animal first mindset, animal land first, like really stewarding the natural resources that we have in the most optimal manner for where we live, and then balancing that with what our consumer is after. So there's a fine balance when you're trying to work with nature instead of working against nature.
And you are out there working alongside your horses, keeping track of things uh, every week, day in and day out. I mean, spring's almost here. How excited are you and everyone to get out there and start moving the cattle around?
I do have a little bit of spring fever. Like yesterday was a little rough. We went from our first fall spring to back to winter, and now we're back to sun shining, and tomorrow it's going to snow again. So that's typical for spring in, on the plains in Colorado, or just in general. But so that it is exciting to see the new seasons and the new seasons budding. Like I used to, frankly, as a kid, only appreciate spring and summer and fall, like when it was warm, just because I prefer to be warm. But now I can see the beauty in all of the seasons. There's a reason that we use this land the way that we do, is because we have the seasonality. So we've really tried to work with nature in that of, the dormant season of our grass. We move cattle off of our grass so we don't have, erosion issues and some of the things that could potentially happen when you don't have green growing grass. Versus, spring, you get back to where first off is warmer, and then you see nature at work with, like, your horses start shedding because the length of the daylight, the amount of light that they're exposed to is telling them that. I mean, it's the same thing with cattle. they start shedding in the spring, and then they have their move into their summer coats because it's warmer. And it is beautiful to see how nature works with itself in so many different facets. So really having that appreciation for all of the seasons is something that I'd like to instill on in our kids, that there's a reason that nature's working like it is. You know, we're starting to be able to turn on wells because you don't really want to have a well running when it's going to freeze and be 32 below. That's not ideal. You're going to break some things. And then the grass is growing. So you start with these warm season or these cool season grasses that grow in the early spring, and you're able to turn out cattle, you know, around that mid-April timeframe so they can graze on cheatgrass where we live. Other parts of the country don't have that. And then our warm seasons start behind that in the summer. So cattle continually have different types of forages that nature is saying, hey, this is the time for that. And of course, you need rain or moisture of some kind for that to happen, which we have less of than some parts of the country. But it is pretty cool to see how all of those seasons work together and how the land and animals kind of work in symbiosis to make that happen.
Now, this is one of those opportunities that comes about because I am such a layman when it comes to ranching. Did you say cheat grass?
I don't think that's actually the technical name. If I have my range science friends will be like, Kara, come on. I'll be like, yeah, I'm more focused on cows, not on the plant side of it. That's just always been the layman term that we have. It's that first grass that starts to grow in the spring is called cheatgrass, and then it heads out. So if you go through one of our pastures after it's already headed out, especially if you have socks on or something like that, and it ends up in there and you don't have tall boots on, that's cheatgrass. That's when it heads out to that point. That's what you'll end up with.
All right.
And cattle really only like it before it heads out. So you have a certain window that they'll graze that grass, because when it gets hot and that grass matures, they won't eat it anymore. And then it becomes a fire hazard.
Yeah, we don't need that.
No.
So let's move on to talking about the processing and quality control. You know, a couple years back, we were able to make a sizable investment in how CCB operates, and we were able to purchase our own beef processing facility. And that has done a lot of things. But let's just kind of talk about the quality of what we're doing, the transparency of what we're doing. How does having that plant under our banner, the USDA facility that is harvesting these animals, like how has that impacted our quality control and our transparency as we've moved forward these last few years?
So the beauty is this is the harvest facility we have been using since we started with CCB. So the quality of product that our consumers have always enjoyed from us has not changed. Yet we're able to secure more control of that process to make sure that our consistency, our quality continues to remain the same. So the reality is we didn't go into this to buy a processing facility. We bought this processing facility for a reason. And it is that quality, that consistency, all of the things that really have a massive impact on steak, on the quality of what you get off these animals. I have a master's degree in cow nutrition and ruminant nutrition. And I remember being so heavily focused on the live animal side of it because that's what I grew up in. That's what I loved. And then I went to two very heavy meat science schools down in Texas, and they push that a lot of, hey, this makes a massive impact on what you produce. And the meat science really comes into play. And the quality of somebody holding a knife can make or break what you have done for the last 24 months on that live cattle side. And I did not give it nearly as much credence as I do now. Because when you see that, it can make a massive difference. You know, somebody can make you could make a great steak on the cow side. Like the beef could be wonderful. till it's converted into meat. And somebody on the processing side could mess that up in a heartbeat.
Mhm.
The
Well, what I've
opposite
seen on
side
oh,
is
sorry.
like, sorry, the processing facility can make a marginal product that much better. So
From what I've seen on my end, is on the digital side where you have like these very digital first meat companies, not necessarily beef companies like we're focused, but they are trying to find whatever meat they can from producers that they know, or they're trying to put the producers into their program, and then that meat, whether it be pork or beef or chicken, then goes to any number of their facilities they have partnerships with. And so as far as like ordering something from something like that, you can get a lot of variability. Whereas, I've been eating our beef for what is it now? Almost 4 years now. And like it is always just it is always the best. It is always amazing. So we are lucky that we're able to keep doing what we've been doing and then improve our efficiency along the way.
yeah, just to touch on that from a science perspective, Jay, for our listeners, there are two very instrumental things that we can do different than the commercial beef supply chain. First off, is we do have control of the entire chain. So, a lot of my job is selecting these animals from the beginning that are going into this chain. So we already have a pretty good idea of how they're going to be as once we turn them into steak, from an eating experience. So we can hone in on the consistency already from the beginning that most other people don't have the ability to do, especially at a bigger scale. When you go into these large harvest facilities, they're harvesting the cattle that come through. And they're putting them into a program depending on what spec comes out of that facility. We're selecting on the front end of these are the specs that we know are going to make great steak, and then they're going to go into our program. So it's already kind of done beforehand. And then on the other side of that is, the meat science side of where it's all, we call it young beef, which that's the only beef in the US that's eligible to be graded USDA choice and USDA prime would be with cattle that are under 36 months of age. So that is different than, you may get in some other programs in some other places. And then lastly, we're able to age these carcasses as a whole carcass for 21 days. And that makes a huge impact on tenderness and the beefy flavor that you have that comes from CCB steaks definitely comes from that process. We end up with less water, so we have more water loss in the dry age process. So when you're cooking that steak, you don't have nearly as much water loss when you're in that part of the process. So you really, the consistency in the eating experience tends to just be that much more consistent with CCB because some of the things that we've put in place on the processing side and the supply chain side.
And that aging process, I mean, I think just based off what I've seen, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's usually across the country what is typical when you're going to a grocery store and you're getting beef, you're likely getting beef that's been aged somewhere around 14 days. And would you agree? Is that a
That's
decent sentiment?
I'd say that's going to vary quite a bit, Jay, because most of these large harvest facilities, and we have quite a few of them very close to here, and a lot of my background has been spent within that space. If from the time that animal is harvested until it gets in a box, so it may not be frozen yet, but it gets in a box to go somewhere, if it's over 5 days, they consider that an operational failure.
Oh wow.
So that's basically that 5 days from the time that animal is harvested until it gets in a box and it leaves. That doesn't mean that, that doesn't continue to age as it's in transit somewhere else. That there is always a potential for that once they're cut down into primals or however they're processing from there. But as far as a whole carcass, That really just doesn't happen in our large production chains because the amount of space that it would take to have, half whole carcasses hanging on the rail in these harvest facilities. Because if you think about the math, the one not very far from here, they're processing about 6,000 head a day. So their hot box and their coolers can only take so many cattle. So they have to keep moving down the chain and fab and get them cut into steaks so they can make more room for the rest of the cattle that are coming behind them. So it becomes basically just a logistical issue that the ability to be able to age cattle in our commercial chain is not very good.
Hmm. Well, I did not know it was moving that fast. That's very interesting. And tells me a lot why I experience different beef when I stray away and sometimes go to the grocery store. So um, forgive me for that.
Just this
um,
once, Jay. Just
okay,
once.
just this once. Never again. Um, so when it comes to kind of looking at all this and looking at the ranching, looking at the animals, looking at the quality control, the processing, there's so many different steps. But in your opinion, like what should a consumer know and maybe focus on when choosing or looking for high quality beef?
I urge a consumer just to have a connection, have that connection back where their food in general comes from. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's beef or you name it. Just have more of a connection back to where that comes from. Because for me personally, that lends to a more kind of intentional consuming pattern. When we really appreciate where everything comes from, no matter what it is, you have kind of a different experience with that food. I mean, when I think about what I'm putting into our girls' bodies, that runs through my head. It doesn't matter what it is. I'm like, how many hands touch this? Is this still in a whole state? Like, what is this? How is this nourishing their body? What is this doing for them instead of what's convenient right now? Which I've been there. I empathize 1,000%. Sometimes you have a screaming toddler in the back and you need to give them some goldfish so they'll stop screaming at you. But when I think about it from a very intentional space of like, I've got beef sticks in the door, which that's us, right?
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
what we do. We live and breathe beef. So I always have to go beef sticks. And a lot of times my stockpile has been dwindled because I have screaming toddlers. But I've got one that's hungry on the way to school. First option I'm going to give them is a beef stick. Secondarily, maybe we'll move to something else. Maybe it's like cashews because that's still a whole food. And so I would say from a consumer perspective, like just be more intentional about the thought process of your food, where it came from, its value, its all the things. From specifically a beef perspective, I'm going to put this in a frame of reference of my kids once again, just from the kind of the mom mindset. I want them to have a good experience with beef, and I see the kind of experience they have with our beef. It's the way, not necessarily the way, just the way it was raised, but the fact that it tastes so good, they want to eat more of it. It's really hard to get a toddler to eat kale. Like, nothing against that, but like you're going to have to put a bunch of seed oils and a lot of things on that kale before a toddler's going to be like, I would like some more of that. But when they have a great eating experience with beef and they ask for it, I'm like, let's do more of that. Like that kind of high quality product. And I think there's a lot to be said about that. It's a great protein source and nutritional source that you can really enjoy eating. That's pretty cool. And there's not a ton of other, healthy things that we can really enjoy eating at a high level. And I put that on the base of like a toddler. If a toddler's
Mhm.
like, I want more CCB ground beef, I'm like, yes, that's a win. Let's do more of that.
It is interesting to watch. your girls join us at lunch, and they will know cuts, and they might not know, like, oh, if it was sliced a certain way, exactly which cut it came from, but they're picking out the steak, they're picking out the brisket, like they are actively talking about what they like. And so um definitely lucky that they both like beef, because there's plenty of it, and they know what they're talking about now.
They didn't get
So
much of a choice, frankly, I
well,
guess
yeah.
is the deal. But
So a couple more questions. And I know my answer to this, but would like to hear yours. What are some of the biggest challenges in getting beef from ranches to consumers?
so I would say with any perishable product, you're going to have a challenge with that. Doesn't matter if it was beef or milk or you name it. There is inherently a big challenge with just the logistics of shipping beef directly, from the ranch to somebody's doorstep. So that was already a big hurdle to overcome. From the live cattle side, I would say one of the biggest challenges is and was, continues to be to our industry, is the segmentation of our industry. There are different economic drivers for a cow calf operator than there are from a yearling operator, from a feed yard, from a processor. There's a massive amount of disconnection throughout the chain. So I'd say that's a big challenge, but also a great opportunity that the beef industry has. That's also why, these animals, they have 4 chambers for their stomach, and they're able to consume grasses that weren't, on grasslands or rangelands that weren't suitable for something else. So that's one of the superpower of beef cattle in general. But that also has led to a lot of segmentation within the beef chain, because we have different resources available, different ways that each part of that chain, particularly the further away we get from that beef product, that becomes that much more evident. What's your thoughts, Jay? What's the biggest challenge?
Well, mine's very technical, but it's around the logistics. It was getting people to understand that the way that we ship things around the country, namely with like the big brown trucks or the big white trucks, you know what I'm talking about. But if we were to ship later in the week, there's so much that can go wrong over a weekend, and getting understanding with our consumers. Like, if you are purchasing from us, we will be shipping to you Monday and Tuesday, and this is for your benefit. And that does create some issues sometimes with certain holidays landing in certain ways, but for the most part, I think nowadays, at least with our community for sure, there's less of a, well, why am I not getting this tomorrow type of situation. And we are able to ship our beef sticks and our beef tallow at a more frequent rate. But I do know very early on in my career, teaching consumers and people who were just interested in beef, like, hey, this is why we do things the way we do. So just a very technical answer.
Yeah, it's true though. It's kind of those expectations are
Mhm.
different than walking down to the grocery store and picking up a steak to eat that night.
Yeah. And that's one really nice thing about working with our customers, is we have done a very good job of building a stronger relationship with the people that, like, keep coming back. And I think our expectations and their expectations, we've met in the middle, and we've agreed, hey, this is great. Let's keep doing this. And we've gotten very lucky there. Um, and it's really easy when your beef is so great. People are willing to do what they have to get it. So last question, just to kind of maybe tantalize a little bit. So what's next for Colorado craft beef? We had a lot of products launched last year, but what's kind of on the horizon?
We're going to continue to double down on what we're good at. We do get a lot of questions of, oh, do you guys raise pork and chicken and do all of these other things? And frankly, the answer is no. We're good at beef, and that's what we focus on. But a lot of my focus, the last year and a half has been expanding that product portfolio, that product line of what we offer, and a lot of that focus has been more on the non-perishable side. So being able to take beef where you are with beef sticks, the tallow initiative, being able to utilize that entire animal in a more efficient manner, really honoring that life that they gave for us to make sure that we're using all parts of them effectively. So we're going to continue to double down on that as far as growth and looking at new product opportunities that would land in that tranche.
And I know one uh, sort of product iteration that we're working on. It's going to be a surprise, but I think people are really going to like it when we finally bring it out later this year. Don't want to say anything more, but I'm excited about it. I think you know what I'm talking about. But um,
The
well,
more ways we can use beef, like the more excited about that. That's
yeah.
that's always a good opportunity.
Well, Kara, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for allowing us to turn the tables and interview you a little bit to get a little bit better understanding. Everyone, thank you for joining us for our first Raising the Stakes. If you have questions you'd like us to answer, get to, just anything you're curious about, send us a message. However, it makes sense. You can send it by email, reach out on our website, reach out on social. We will see it when it comes through. And yeah, so Kara, thank you. And everyone, have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Jay.